England definitely didn't deserve more in their last game. What's the latest from the camp, James?
Well, everybody's just about woken up now, I think, after being sent to sleep by England on Friday. Look, I mean, it was a difficult one, because I think on the one hand, the performance itself was bad. I think that's uniform and everybody can have that opinion. But the result was fine. You know, they're still on course to top the group. The control of the group is in their own hands. The players were given a bit of a time to meet their families, which they haven't been able to do since they've been here. And there's usually a down day, effectively, in terms of training after the match. So I think a moment to reflect and maybe put things into a bit of context has probably been quite useful for the England players. Marcus Rashford was speaking today, and actually I thought he was quite interesting in what he was saying, because it was this, again, Shaka, this wasn't a sort of spin journalism job, but he was asked just sort of generic, I think it was the first question actually in his press conference, just about whether the players who haven't been playing are ready to step up, and if Gareth chooses to rotate in that third game against Wales. And he said, look, the training here is really good, and it wasn't always the case that these sessions were as intense as they are, and the players as a result weren't always as dedicated in those sessions as they were. And that actually was quite an indictment on Roy Hodgson, who, of course, Sam Allardyce had the one game in between Roy and Gareth Southgate, but he actually didn't play in that game, Marcus Rashford. So he was talking directly about Roy Hodgson, and that, I think, inadvertently has put everything into a bit of a wider perspective. The sort of reaction to the negativity around the England performance, it was sort of reframed as, well, look how far we've come in the last 6 years. And the fact that we're talking about a 0-0 draw while England is still top of the group, as I say, control of the group is in their hands. Really, it's fine. There isn't any major issue. I think a lot of people who paid money to come out here and wanting to be entertained, and people in the bars on a Friday night, probably were thinking, maybe I'll just go home and not go mad now in the club because England have depressed me too much and I don't want to go out. Or maybe they'll drink their way through it. I've no idea. That's all as maybe. But in the bigger picture, I think what Rashford was sort of saying is, look, we understand this. We can put this in the appropriate context, and we're not going to panic. And the proof will be obviously in the performance against Wales and what happens after that. But I thought he inadvertently put things into a good perspective today.
What's the ceiling, Shaka, after those first two games that you've seen from the Three Lions then?
Well, it's difficult to say, just because of how contrasting the two performances were, in all honesty. And to James's point, I understand, and we had Nader Manua on after the US game, continually reminding everyone that this is still the best performing England team since 1966. A team that got to the World Cup semi-final 4 years ago, that got to the Euro final last year. And you have to keep that in perspective. It's important for us as analysts, and in particular for that team, to remember that. But we all know the English fans, they're expecting England to go out and win every single game by 6 and 7-0 and dominate any kind of football. And that's what England fans have come to expect. And if they don't deliver, I think, and this is where I'm going to be a little bit critical of the British media, James. I think there's never a middle ground. There's never a middle ground as to how it's reported in the press. And it's important for the team to remember that you have to be able to manage the highs and lows from game to game and during games. And I think that's an important sign of this team's maturity in doing that.
I think
if you think there's no middle ground, Shaq, you didn't read my piece.
Well,
that's
wonderful, James Ollie, whose pieces you should always read.
Yeah, no, I think,
but you're all right. Yeah, sorry,
definitely. Listen, I think that this is a good group to discuss this, right, Shaka? You obviously know, what it's like as a player, and the three of us have grown up as well in that country. We know exactly the expectations. There's a lot of...
I still have to say, Louise, I feel that it's reported often, Shaka, as well, to what you were saying, are the England fans a generalisation all the time? They think they're going to go out and win everything.
That's where I was going.
I think it's a lot more the other way these days, where you're like, oh, gosh, how far are we going to go this time?
There is...
Except for the last two tournaments. which we still didn't win.
Yeah, no, there is definitely a pessimistic approach these days, and there is context to be had. To James's point, it's not, there is more than just the Sun and the Daily Star. That there is a culture in England as well that wants to see this young team develop. My biggest issue, right, and Shaka said a very good point, right? 2018, he took England to the semi-finals. Gareth Southgate, that's the first time England has done that since Bobby Robson in 1990. The final in Euro 2020. It's a vibrant, young team, right? But that's where my criticism is, because I feel that as good as the USMNT were, because we gave him a lot of credit, it annoys me because of the talent that he has, that sometimes his in-game management is so loyalist to what he thinks overall the plan should be, that he doesn't think that sometimes maybe there should be other attempts to penetrate and try and get a goal. That's my only issue. I hope, and also it's a good point to remember that there are going to be games where you're going to struggle. Hopefully they will learn from that. And then the question is this, to me, the ceiling is this: they can reach this final. They can do it. England's biggest enemy is England itself. So as long as they can try and figure that out, hopefully that can happen. It's just that obviously, to me, my biggest problem most of the time, and I give him a lot of respect, right, as a player, former player and a manager, but sometimes my biggest criticism is Southgate's limitations into tactically what this England team can be. That's the only thing.
But to that point, Elemi, I mean, I think Gareth Southgate has been criticised for a lot of the players that he's chosen to be in this squad, a lot of the players that he's left out, and he's always remained loyal to those who've played well for him. But we criticize Gareth Southgate for doing that, and then praise Luis Enrique for doing exactly the same thing. And I mean, of course, there's an argument to be had about Spain and the Euros should have beaten Italy themselves, and quite arguably could have gone on to win the whole thing, but they didn't. England were finalists, or be beaten finalists after penalties. So I just think it's how we view different managers doing exactly the same thing, and the criticisms are sometimes unfair. And I think the important aspect to that is not necessarily how we report on it, or James or any of our other journalists, but how that's interpreted and accepted within the camp. And to have Marcus Rashford come out and speak as he did, I think speaks to a sense of maturity, a sense of we're going to do our things our way. We have to block out the noise as much as possible.
Yeah, the issue with Southgate and England, to me, is this. The key to Gareth Southgate's success with England is that he has, because he's steeped in the history of it, he understands the perennial tournament failings that England have had in the past, which is they don't keep the ball well enough, they make individual errors, there's sometimes a lack of discipline, and of course there's penalties. And what he's done in the last 6 years is deconstruct all of the relationships that the England national team has had with each of those issues and tackled them one by one in a cautious, intelligent, pragmatic way. The issue now is this is a young squad that isn't or shouldn't be encumbered by any of that. And he's still managing as if to avoid those pitfalls rather than taking the risk with the young group to go and say, go and win it. Go and achieve what's possible rather than think about what happens if it might go wrong and how you're going to react to it. And it's that step change that I think Gareth Southgate is struggling with. And it's often distilled into his in-game management, where at 0-0, you're thinking, okay, go on, just chuck another forward on, or let's mix it up a bit, or let's take a couple of risks, let's be braver with the ball. And I think that's the only element of it that he's struggling with, is he thinks this is what's got him this far. This is what's taken England to a semi-final and a final, that methodical, safety first, iron out the mistakes, approach versus this young, dynamic, exciting, exhilarating group of players who are best on the front foot. They're most exciting when they're taking risks. And that's what I think people want to see a bit more of. So the more that he doesn't play a Phil Foden in a 0-0 draw, or he talks about how good the centre-backs were in a game where England were really quite poor with the ball, the more that conversation starts to get louder and louder in the background. And that, I think, is, if he can just make that shift, then England could really be a team that could potentially go all the way. I don't think they defend well enough to win it, but they need to make sure that worrying about their own limitations is not putting a ceiling on their chances.
Thank you very much for watching ESPN FC on YouTube. For more highlights, analysis and exclusive content, be sure to subscribe.